Welcome to the Spiritual Underground Podcast, coming to you from the wood shop at DTM Enterprises, my little wood shop in my backyard. We're here on a hot summer day, 93 degrees over there on the thermometer today, but it's not too bad in here. So we will tackle a hot summer day here in southern Indiana at Podcast Studio. I want to get these commercials out of the way real quick. DTMWW.net. It's my woodwork and handyman business. You can also contact me at 502-292-7444 for anything on that you need. Refinishing, custom woodwork, my own symbols, anything like that. The music around the podcast is brought to you by Darren Frank. Any information on that gentleman's music, you can reach out to me at spiritualunderground.org, where you can also find show notes and a contact me page. And you can see pictures of the guests on there and also links to the podcasts. And finally, go to Amazon and get Christopher Cohn's 12-Step Spiritual Recovery. It's a master's version of the 12 steps, and it's available for everyone too. So it's formatted to where you don't have to have the alcoholism, the addiction. For years we've been saying, wish everybody had this program in their life and had an opportunity to work these steps, and that book has made it possible. So 12-Step Spiritual Recovery, James Christopher Cohn at Amazon. Today I got another special guest. I just got so many special people in my life today that I know that I can sit here. I'm a part of a podcasting group where some guys and gals get together on Facebook. It's a closed group, and we talk about it. And people are always looking for guests. And one thing I have is like an endless supply almost of guests. I look out on the horizon. I'm like, I can do this. I'm tempted to start doing it twice a week, but I'm just not ready to jump into that deep. The one new piece of content a week. So today Wayne's with us. I met Wayne as soon as I talk about bouncing off the halls and walls of AA for about 4 years. From my initial entry into the rooms was in 2011, and my current sobriety date is January 1st of 2015. So those 4 years I was unable to get any traction and just couldn't push my chips to the middle of the table. And in 2014 I got caught breaking in at house and whatnot, and the consequences got ratcheted way up on me. And about that same time I met Wayne in a meeting that was downstairs from the Spiritual Underground. I did a 2 for Tuesday on Tuesday nights, and we'll go to a meeting at 6 p.m. and then another one at 7:30, and that 6 p.m. meeting was called Emotional Sobriety. And that meeting had a big, huge influence on my early recovery. There were some strong people in there. The whole concept was around Bill Wilson's Grapevine article titled the same. I believe it was titled Emotional Sobriety. And we read that in the beginning of the meeting, and the way a lot of people read how it works or read some of the type of AA literature. We read Emotional Sobriety. So your sobriety date's just a little bit after mine. Welcome to the studio, Wayne.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I've been wanting to get you on here. We've had a little bit of business dealings now and again together, and it kind of, and then also some relationships. We've bumped into one another and kind of reunited in a way because of that, which is kind of neat. That happened. So I always think everything happened for a reason, and I don't have any doubt that. Frankly, that we bumped back into each other on purpose. There's a reason for that.
Emotional sobriety was an important meeting to my first year of sobriety, definitely.
Yeah, I remember. Well, you had a wall up for a while in there. Oh man, I'm gonna get that turned off. So we always start, because I think it's really important that people talk about. We start off with this, and it's just been a tradition here. So we'll start off with your sobriety date.
It is March 17th of 2015.
Cool. Yeah,
St. Patty's Day, but that's just completely a coincidence.
Yeah, and mine is of the same year, January 1st, New Year's Day, and that was a complete coincidence too. I did not mean to have that as my there was no aim to have that as my sobriety date.
I never really was a big celebrator. I never celebrated St. Patty's Day as a big deal that much, even in college. So it's kind of funny that that's how it fell. But
yeah, it was an excuse at times, but it just wasn't one of my big days either. I didn't see much didn't put a lot of stock in St. Patrick's Day. So that's about 2 months after after my sobriety date, and that seems about right now. 4 something years plus away from that. That little bit of time doesn't.
I always felt like you were so much further along.
I did learn a lot in those 4 years of bouncing around, though. Was that your first entry? Was that your?
That is my first. Technically, I mean, I'll probably mention my first meeting, but for all intensive purposes, that was my first go.
Yeah. So I had about 4 years of actual trying, and some good teachers around me where I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't get traction. I just couldn't put things down, and did a lot of pretending like I was sober and going to meetings and drinking on the nights I wasn't going to meetings and trying to pretend like I was sober. So I had a lot of experience prior to that, so that's probably what that was. I was
you were ready.
Yeah, I finally actually was, and that was the consequences got ratcheted up. But anyway, this is not about me. This is about you. So let's start off with some of where were you raised? What kind of family system did you grow up in? And
all right, I'm from Breckenridge County, near Rough River area.
Nice.
Born in Bowling Green, because Breckenridge County Hospital cannot deliver babies even to this day.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If that tells you kind of where I'm from, very small town atmosphere. The county was dry until last 5 years or so, but
it's changed a lot in Kentucky across the state.
It was my mother and father were married. They divorced when I was about 2, and my father is not part of my story, has not been in my life. But my mother's a big part of my story. She battled with same addiction or addiction issues, I will say, and I was actually raised by my grandmother. So when I was the first thing I guess that kind of sticks out, when I was 3, I got burned on 15% of my body, 3rd and 4th degree burns on 15% of my body. And that plays into later in my childhood a little bit, but
how'd that happen?
it's so I was raised on a farm, and we burned our trash in 55-gallon barrels. And this is such a silly story, but my grandfather and I were riding around, our town there, Hardinsburg, and we saw a fire truck. I asked him what it did, and he told me, puts out fires. And so when we got home, he was in the garden, tending the garden and distracted, and I was running around, decided I was going to be a fireman. I was going to practice being a fireman. So the trash barrel was burning. So I filled up a container full of water, went over to that barrel to practice putting it out. Well, unfortunately, that was a gas container I'd picked up and filled with water, and there was enough gas and fumes left in that, and it just resulted in about 15 to 20% of my body having 3rd and 4th degree burns.
Wow.
I was in the hospital about 3-4 months.
Really? Dang God.
Yeah, up here in Louisville. But
as a 3-year-old.
As a 3-year-old.
So do you really remember it, or was it this story that's told to you that you remember more than the actual?
The only thing I remember, the stories they've told me. I feel like I remember because they had to take me via ambulance from the hospital in Hardinsburg there up to Louisville, and I was packed in ice, and I feel like I remember that, but I don't. I don't have a lot of memories from early childhood, so maybe that's just one they had told me. And
I wonder about that too. I have some of those memories, and it feels like they're really mine, but I believe that they were told to me enough times that I now have I've imprinted them as a memory.
Tricky things too.
Yeah. Because we moved in this house when I was 3, and I have remembrance of that. I mean, I can remember a couple things. I can remember that. One of the things I can remember is that Dad pulled out the medicine cabinet in what was my mom's bathroom, and it had one of them razor blade dispensaries in the back of the medicine cabinet. I don't know back with the single-edged razor blades, they'd have a slot in the medicine cabinet, and they would just drop them down in the stud wall.
Okay.
To dispose of them, because it was safe back in there. It'd have a little slot.
Okay.
And he had changed that out, and I remember getting hold of one of the razor blades. I cut myself. And now, see, I know I remember that, but it could be that I was told the story enough time.
That's true.
That it's imprinted. Same thing about a few of those things, but it's interesting. But something as traumatic as that, because I talk about that a lot in here on the podcast, is these trauma situations that happen to us, and that's not like something that was like a violent trauma or something that was like, a deed done to you,
No,
where you pick it up.
definitely wasn't.
But still, yet, as a little kid spending a number of months in a hospital, that is trauma. That's traumatic, and plus, I'm sure it was painful as all get out. You probably don't remember it, but
I
I
don't
know
remember
it
the
had to
pain.
be, right?
Huh?
I mean, it had to be.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was. I want to step back just for a second.
Absolutely,
so
man. We're just
when
conversation.
we'll talk about obviously our first drinks later, but supposedly, according to my mother, while her and my father were still married, so before that age of two, around that age of two, they had a huge party. And so everybody's like passed out, and I go around as like a 2-year-old and start drinking all the leftover drinks. So
Oh, yeah?
supposedly I had a rough 2 days after that, because so I jokingly will say my first drink was at the age of 2. But
That's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but to get back on, I guess, more points. So that happened to me at 3, and that does play a decent factor in my life, early childhood especially. But like I say, my mother was in and out of my life, but my grandmother mainly raised me. My mother was in rehab several times. I don't even know the exact number because she's passed away now, but I know it was several times. She had a couple suicide attempts that were unsuccessful, and so she really fought hard with that. But my grandmother, I call her my mama, she's very important to me. She raised me in a very loving, stable environment, and my mother was in my life. She just wasn't a steady influence, and she cared about me. I was lucky. I had aunts and uncles and cousins, and so I didn't have a super traumatic in certain aspects. I do, the few times there were some things with my mother when I would try to live with her. I remember I was really young, let's say 5 or 6, and I was with her on my birthday, and she threw a little party for me, and we moved around a little bit when I did try to live with her. We lived in Louisville, Cincinnati, New Jersey, some different areas, so I lived with her occasionally. It wasn't all my grandmother, but I remember this one time, it was my birthday, and I was probably 5, 6, and she threw me a little deal, and then she decided to go out that night, and she made me promise not to tell my grandmother if she called that she was out. Just say she went to the grocery, but she left me alone on my birthday. Things
wow.
like that. So
How old do you think you were?
probably 5 or 6.
Really?
Yeah, I was fairly young. And let's see. So I'll bring I'm scarred from those burns. Mainly my right leg, a little bit my left leg, some other scars elsewhere. And so kids, as you know, can be incredibly mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did get made fun of a lot over my scars. So that introduced some angst into the equation. I also remember, we hear in the rooms that we never felt. A lot of people say that they never felt a part of, or they always felt different, I guess. And that
never
was
felt
one way.
a part of. I always felt separate from everybody else. Felt like we were on the outside.
Yeah.
Couldn't be comfortable in our own skin.
I was definitely not comfortable in my own. I would not wear shorts until I almost was actually probably in college. Even high school, I hated wearing shorts.
Because of scars.
Mm-hmm. Because of the scars. And the other thing, my mother embarrassed me. So my family is super I was embarrassed of my mother. I would say she didn't embarrass me, but my family is extremely respected where I'm from. My grandfather was till he passed away. My grandmother's extremely respected, and then my uncle was the county clerk for years, and so just pretty much the entire family's respected. But when I was with my grandmother, and somebody'd be like, "Now, which one are you?" Because she'd introduce me as her grandson, and I'd say, or we'd say, "I'm Nancy's," and the look on people's face was like, oh, like, oh, okay. And so I was embarrassed of that, and then
Yeah, that's
I
tough. I mean, do you think of a little kid and those little tweaks like that? I mean, I know like it's not, and you kind of want to like set it aside, but that's all that. Any one little thing in itself is not the thing, right? It's the piling up of the multiple of this going on. These different things, cumulative effect.
And you also know we're similar ages. That you didn't have as much, like, I didn't deal with it back then. There wasn't therapy or any. You just I dealt with it internally.
Stuff it.
Yeah, and I remember I heard somebody, and it may have been on one of your podcasts I listened to, talk about being maybe passively suicidal. And I would say that's I wanted to, as there were times that I didn't want to be alive anymore, but I didn't really take any measure to that for whatever reason. That was never. I don't know if I was too. We didn't have a lot of guns around my house. My grandfather died when I was in 3rd grade, so it was just me and my grandmother on this big farm, and so I don't know if how things would have played out if things had been different. But we didn't really have guns on the farm and things like that. But anyway, I was a fairly good kid. I made good grades. I played sports. I wasn't very good at sports. I love sports, just not athletically gifted. The only thing I really did to act out as a kid, and I'm not downplaying this, is I would steal baseball cards and Playboys. I would steal those two things fairly consistently. I never got caught or any kind of repercussions really over that, but that other than that, I made good grades. I
like from what, a drugstore kind of thing, or from a
Walmart was where I got the baseball cards, and then the Playboys would be like little convenience stores.
Yeah,
and but I was very curious, obviously, like I think any a lot of young men are. Then again, my trying to think, get back on point here. I will tell you one thing that will come up later is I equated my mother's problems, even though I knew she drank all the time. For whatever reason, I equated her issues more with pot. I don't know why. I'm sure she did other drugs too. We didn't have a lot of talks about that. So I equated that as her issue. But I decided 3rd grade, I'd gone down to see her for the summer. And I had a bad habit. This came up a few times in my life, early childhood, of I hated to tell people no. And so after the summer was over, she asked me to stay in Georgia with her. I was like, okay. So we lived in this trailer in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. And I went to school down there for about half my 3rd grade year. I would get home from school and end up putting myself to bed at night before she ever got home from being at work then out. I had some neighbors that kept an eye on me, but other than that, for most of those few months, I spent just kind of by myself, and I hated it. So at that point, I told her I was moving back in with my grandmother up here in Kentucky, and she could do whatever she wanted. We both came back, but she was she'd be some with us, some in other parts of the state doing different things. But so that's when I went back and lived with my grandmother from that point until I graduated high school. So nothing else really crazy happened in my actual childhood. I had some glasses, a bad haircut, some acne, those scars. So 7th, 8th grade, even freshman year weren't very fun.
Yeah, I still today, like, I can't get over how self-conscious I was of every little flaw. It didn't make any difference. A hair out of place, a smallest little pimple, any kind of thing.
I had the acne too.
Yeah, any didn't make any difference. It could be a bunch or a little. The hypersensitivity to our appearances.
Yeah, that was. I think that's always been. Even to this day, I still deal. I should probably be a little more comfortable in my own skin than I am, but I definitely struggled with that then until I was playing sports football my freshman and sophomore year, and so I got contacts and the acne started clearing up a little bit, and I started to get a lot more comfortable in my skin. Still making decent grades. Then I had a car accident that my sophomore year. I had my license early, so sophomore year I had a car accident, and I decided not to play sports anymore. I got a job to get another vehicle, and then I guess we'll get to the first drink part. I'd had drinks here and there. I'm not going to say this is my first drink, but it was my first real drunk. My cousin, who's about 10 years older than me, a great guy, he was working in Ohio somewhere, and he had decided to buy me a very inexpensive car so I'd have something to drive after I wrecked the other one.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went up to visit him, and I was 16. He's 26 at the time. I think he's almost exactly 10 years older than me. So I go up to visit him, and the plan was I was going to drive the new car back. Well, so that night we're hanging out with some friends of his, all in that 26, maybe a little younger range, but considerably older than me, and they decided it'd be fun to let me drink, and so I drank pretty hardcore. I think I did some keg stands. The main thing I remember is at one point, I guess they were being so loud and maybe yucking it up about having a 16-year-old drunk that the cops got called. So they shoved me in the guy's bedroom to kind of hide me while the cops showed up. And while they did this, I vomited all over this guy's silk sheets that he was very proud of. I mean, just destroyed them, which did not go over very well.
Yeah.
My cousin may have had to give him some money to replace those sheets. But the next morning when we get up, my cousin was kind of in a way maybe hoping to scare me a little bit with that first drunk. I don't know necessarily his thought process, but I'd gotten drunk so early and slept it off that I basically didn't have a hangover. So there was really no negative consequences to that.
Huh.
So that was I guess what we'll call my first drunk, about 16. And in high school, from that point on, I don't know how it was where you grew up, but I partied maybe every other weekend. And that was considered maybe mid-level partying. I wasn't considered a party kid by any means, but I would drink to get drunk. I didn't like the taste of beer at all, so I would drink vodka.
Kid like that's better.
Yeah, and but the thing is, and this was just a high school thing, I would almost always get sick. And it was also the only time
so you were a puker
in high school, just in high school, and just off vodka mainly. And it was also the only time that I really showed any violent tendencies when I was drinking. But other than that, like I say, about every other weekend, no real consequences. I would drive home some, and but nothing really happened. I do remember a few times my mother got 3 DUIs in the span of 2 years. And I remember a couple times I'd be stone cold sober and get pulled over by state policemen just because of who my mother was, and they would to give me field sobriety tests, make sure.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that sober,
and it happened sober, luckily. So let's see. Then when I graduated, going into my senior year, I was going to go to the University of Kentucky my whole life. Big UK fan. Really, the only place I was going to go. And I had a partial scholarship. I made good grades, not great grades. Probably graduated high school with like a 3.4, but I could always kill a standardized test. So my ACT score was enough to get me some scholarships. So I went to visit the University of Kentucky. It was the only place I'd ever applied to, only place I was going. And Breckenridge County High School at the time has about 800 people in it total. 200 people in a graduating class. So when I went to visit the University of Kentucky, it kind of overwhelmed me. The sheer size. There was talks of, general education classes having 500 people in them. Or at least I remember it could have been 200, 300, who knows. But it blew me away. And for some reason, Murray State contacted me to the accounting department there, because that was my interest at the time. I liked high school accounting classes. I knew you could make some decent money. So the accounting department at Murray State contacted me, asked me to apply and visit. And I did, and I ended up getting a full scholarship to Murray.
Wow.
It was, and I just fell in love with the campus, when I went down there. Just more, I'm grown up mainly in small town Kentucky, mainly in smaller towns. It was what I was used to. So I ended up deciding to go to Murray State. A few people from my graduating class went there, but I also looked at it as a fresh start. In high school, I was a weird combination of I could be friends with a lot of different people, and I was friends with some very popular people, even though I wouldn't have been considered that group. I was friends with so many people, and I wanted to get away, because at the time I think 75% of Breckenridge County went to Western Kentucky. It was a lot, and I did not want to go to WKU. I wanted to start over in a way.
Go someplace else.
Yeah, so that's how I ended up going to Murray State. 96 was when I graduated high school and went down to Murray.
Just to jump in, because there's a couple things that's caught me. One of them is a little bit jokey. The fact that you grew up in a farm in rural Kentucky and there's no guns around, people are probably not going to believe that you actually lived in Kentucky, and that was the case.
I am. Well, my cousins hunted, and but I am from. When you think of rural Kentucky, that is where I'm from, and I'm very much more city. Yeah. Even when I was growing up, I didn't feel like I fit in down there. Yeah. I didn't. I farmed. I have a cousin that if you looked up the definition of a redneck in the dictionary, I think there's a picture of him. Okay, he worked at a factory full time and farmed full time. I don't think he ever slept. But I did some tobacco with him. I did, farming. I did some different things, but I hated it. That was not what I enjoyed.
There's another thing that rang my bell was, and I think it maybe is like it's a precursor to our continuing using and stuff, is this ability to this chameleon thing where we can fold ourselves into these multiple social groups, where we can actually be in these multiple social groups and find ourselves fitting in. You know what I mean? The same thing with the mask wearing. I know I became a pro at that, and I know I did the same thing in high school. I could hang out with what we called the hoods, or I could hang out with the preps, and I did play ball and play sports and stuff, and that was kind of the end. Pop your polo collar and all that, or I could have on my jeans jacket and tore up blue jeans and black boots and that kind of stuff, and hang out with that crowd too.
Yeah, I got along with most everybody. I mean, there were a few people that didn't like me. You know how that is.
Sure,
but I didn't.
But I don't remember. I don't remember a lot of other people doing that. Most people were predominantly one or the other.
I agree.
And I found myself finding spots according to what I needed to be doing in any particular day to fit in with the crowd that served me for my purpose at that point in time. And I got high and drunk with both groups.
Did you? I will tell you that I do feel, for the longest time, I felt I was probably my most mature as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, just because of some stuff, some stories I left out with my mom that kind of happened during that time. And I feel like I stopped maturing about the time I got to college. Maybe it was because I went out on my own or whatever.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but I felt like, I would say I felt like I was a little better person than I ended up becoming. I will tell you, get back on. So again, I was drinking about every other weekend. Actually, this happened. Never mind. I lost my time frame. So I got to college at Murray. Freshman year went fine. I don't know how much I drank. I drank a lot. I partied a lot. My grades were okay. I had to keep a 3.2 to keep my scholarship, and it fell right below 3.16. So I had to take a summer course at Owensboro Community College to keep my grade point average, to keep my scholarship for that next year. So the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, I worked at a paper factory, paper mill, Willamette. It's in Hancock County, and did that summer class. And the good thing is that cousin, the one I talked about that I first got drunk with, he had a house in Breckinridge County, but he worked construction, and he'd work anywhere from Georgia to Tennessee to Ohio, and so he was not in town during the week, and so he let me stay at his house during the summer, so I wouldn't have to go back to living in a house with rules with my grandmother. And I will tell you, my grandmother, the one thing it's funny how when we get older we regret some of our actions, and as a high school junior and senior, I would go out. She would tell me my curfew would be midnight on the weekend, and I would go out to hang out with a girlfriend or hang out with friends. And I'd stay out till 2 or 3 in the morning and come back, and she just, she's a 60, 70-year-old woman, not really expecting to have to raise a teenager at that point, and she couldn't really discipline me. So she'd be like, "You're late," and I'd be like, "Yeah, I know," and I'd go to bed. And I realize now she was up until that point worrying. She was always up, and until I got home. She would never go to bed until I got home. So it's like, I realize how selfish that behavior was, but
Right.
at the time I just wanted to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think, like a lot of people, I did not ever enjoy being told what to do.
Still don't.
I've gotten a little better.
Yeah, I'm better too, but I still don't like it. I still don't like it a bit.
I don't. But so I didn't want to move back home to even have those vague rules. So I lived at my cousin's house, and so I basically drank every night. I'd go to work, school, and then drink. And I remember there was a guy I was kind of hanging out with that was, how high school goes a little longer than college. So he was wrapping up his senior high school, and I guess his parents didn't care what he did, because he just hang out with me all night drinking vodka. And he tried to get me to smoke weed, and I was like, no, I draw the line. I don't do drugs. I just drink. Because again, for whatever reason, I never equated my mother's issues with that. I was like, drugs are the devil, I didn't say that, but anyway, I just wouldn't do drugs. So, but that summer I ended up getting an A in that class and keeping my scholarship, and that was the last time I lived in Breck County. I didn't go home any more summers. And then I went back to Murray. I joined a fraternity my sophomore year. I was kind of against it my freshman year, and then some of the guys on my floor that I liked, they were in a fraternity, so I decided to join a fraternity, which obviously ramped up my drinking even more. It gave me even easier access to it. Murray at the time was dry. You had to drive 10 minutes into Tennessee to go to bars or get alcohol. Murray was dry, so the Greek system was huge. House parties and parties in general. So sophomore year, again, nothing real crazy. I started liking beer though, which is, I told you, in high school and early college I did not like beer, but one day I just took a drink of Miller Lite and fell in love.
That was my brand.
Fell in love. I just, from that point on, I was a beer man, and I never got sick anymore, really. That was not something.
And I could drink a lot of them. For a
could.
while, I had a buddy who drank Budweiser. And I would, because just the ease of having this drinking the same thing,
Yeah.
but I would overshoot the mark on the Bud. You know, and then when I switched over and started drinking Miller Lite, I could pretty much drink as many of those as I wanted to. I would never ended up, because I like to party long. I didn't want the party to end.
Yeah, I was never a heavy beer drinker. I got into Guinness a little bit later down the road in adulthood, but I was adulthood. I think the first thing I drank was Busch Light for some reason, and then cheap, and then but Miller Lite was my brand.
Me too.
Miller. I started drinking and driving pretty consistently. Just for whatever reason, I was the one who would always be in charge of getting us home. I guess I was fairly good at it, but I wouldn't drink any less than anybody else, or let it curb what I was drinking. But college went on. I actually got to one point where I wanted to quit school, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I never enjoyed school, and I didn't like it, and I didn't know, but I was in this rut. It was probably about my third year. I went to Murray for 7 years to get a undergraduate degree, by the way. 7 years to get a 4-year degree. So I like to joke, in my first junior year.
I heard one of my favorite speakers the other day said so I'll say it in yours. I zipped through college in 7 years.
Zipped through it? I didn't zip through it.
Well, he said that in the longer term than.
It was. I enjoyed the social. I just could not stand the class.
Yeah.
If I didn't like a subject, I couldn't focus on it. So, again, I'm still just mainly drinking. Then, at some point about that time, I don't remember the exact age. I was about 22. So my fourth year of college or so, I all of a sudden just said, F it. I don't know what changed. Again, nothing stands out, but I just basically said screw it, and I started doing ecstasy.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna
from an anti-drug guy to I'm gonna start doing
ecstasy, and I did a lot. But and then I introduced. You just mentioned something that you never wanted the party to end. Well, I didn't get sick. I didn't really black out much. But what I would do is I'd pass out early. Okay, because I just could not. I could not pace myself. Just drank. I drank and I drank and I drank until my body told me it was time to go to bed. And I would I would leave a party. I'd be like, I gotta go. It's time. My body's shutting down. I'd leave the party. So I've introduced now one extracurricular into my repertoire, and I decide that I'm tired of being the first one to leave parties. So I introduced cocaine into my mix at that point.
That'll keep you partying.
I wanted to be able to drink more.
Yeah.
And well, unfortunately, what it did was it kept me up way later than anybody else.
Yep. Now I'm watching the sun come up.
Yeah.
And I didn't get any sleep last night.
And nobody.
I'm going to do it again tonight. And somehow or another, I'm going to have to get some sleep between now and then, or keep doing the cocaine to stay up.
And I would call people, and they'd be like, "I'm in bed," and I'd be like, "Oh, okay." I was bored out of my mind at like 6 a.m, and everybody else had been asleep for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I actually, again, I was never suicidal, but I also didn't think I was going to live long. I did not think I would see the age of 30. And this was probably 22, 23. And I lost direction I was still in school. I never got kicked out of school. But basically what I would do, this is the reason it took me 7 years, is say I started a semester with 12 hours or 15 hours. If I started to fail a class, or couldn't make it because it was at 8 a.m. and I had to schedule that class, I would end up dropping classes. Now I worked the entire time, but that's why it took me so long. And
I never finished for a similar kind of reason. I just would drop classes. I just couldn't keep it up, and then I would end up dropping them before I would fail out.
Yeah.
And
that was my MO. I did not want to graduate. Did not know what I was going to do. I actually did lose. I don't admit this often. The first consequence I really had, two of them I'll bring up real quick in college. First one was I got fired from a job. I'd worked at a Blockbuster Video for about 2.5 years. I was very miserable because that job is not as fun as you might think it would be. And one night I went out. I had to work the next morning at whatever time, and I went out and I proceeded to do so much stuff. It was crazy. Some things I haven't even mentioned yet, and some homemade wine got involved at one point when I'd already been drinking, and I just didn't go to work the next day. And so my friend was my boss, and she had to fire me. And so I lost my job, and I decided at that point that I wasn't going to get a job right away, and I wasn't going to pay any bills, but man, was I going to max out my credit cards. And so that's what I did for a few months. Then I kind of think this is impressive, but now it's not something to be proud of in sobriety. But I actually almost got kicked out of my fraternity for the drugs. Me and another guy basically got banned from the house. I was living in a house. I got kicked out of living in the house, and we both got banned for the house for a semester and had to do certain things. We were supposed to quit doing drugs, and we were supposed to go to AA meetings. So in Paducah, Kentucky, which was about 45 minutes from Murray, I was supposed to do, I think once or twice a month, I was supposed to do AA meetings if I wanted to stay in the fraternity. We both agreed to do it. I think I went to one AA meeting. So I don't remember. That was my first meeting ever. I went to it, stayed, never went back because I realized there was no way they could check it. So I lied about going every couple of weeks. Yeah. I would actually drive to Paducah and go out drinking.
Oh, yeah.
So those were, I would say I didn't have a lot of consequences in college, but those are two pretty big ones. I didn't think I had a problem. I didn't really care if I had a problem either. I was just living life. Then I got another job at another now defunct company, Radio Shack. So I don't know if that says something about my work history or not. But I ended up getting a little bit back on track.
Somebody else told a similar story not too long ago that I heard somebody say that they had worked it too. It was the guy who took us rafting. It was our guide on their whitewater rafting trip. Yeah. It said the one Radio Shack was one of the places he worked to.
It was, it wasn't. It was.
He said these places that he worked at were no longer in business anymore. And
it wasn't my favorite job.
He was praying for his current employer. It
was a fine job. And I convinced at that point most of my friends, because a lot of my friends actually they drank heavily. And it's funny, my boss that hired me at Radio Shack, he's like, now, he was one of my best friends. He's like, I don't care if you drink. We drink all we want, but you got to stop the drugs. And I was like, okay. I did more after, because again, I hated being told what to do.
Yeah.
And so I just got better at hiding it. Let's see. So then, I decided, I'll go ahead, and this is an embarrassing story, but I'm about 24, still in college, still in a fraternity, still doing that kind of stuff, and I still didn't really want to graduate. I didn't want to grow up. And I took, we had these things called formal. Anyway, it was some fraternity event. I took a friend's little sister. A friend's little sister wanted to go, right? She was a freshman. And so I took her because I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. And we're sitting there, and we're at the event. And somehow my age comes up. And she's like, you're 24? And she's like an 18-year-old freshman. So at that point, I realized I needed to graduate soon. So that motivated me. That's the whole reason I got my college degree right there, is I got embarrassed, I guess. So everything's going well for the most part, except I'm miserable inside. I'm very miserable. Got a girlfriend, but I'm still doing doing drugs. I'm still drinking. I drank probably my last 3 years of college. I drank 6 or 7 nights a week. I went out 6 or 7 nights a week. And then I got a job with Sherwin-Williams once I graduated, and I knew I needed to get out of Murray. I needed to change. I needed a geographical change. You may have heard that. And I needed one. So they sent me to Marion, Illinois with Sherwin-Williams, which is about an hour and a half from Murray. The problem is that's not very far from Murray. And I took myself up to Marion, Illinois, too, is another part of the problem. But I got up there and I worked for about a year with Sherwin. Then I would still go back to Murray and do some of that same stuff. I was still doing the extracurriculars. I was drinking and driving a lot. And at that point, my boss got promoted here to Louisville. And I asked him pretty much immediately if he would try to get me transferred, because that would put me closer to my family. I had some friends that lived in Louisville because I didn't know anyone in Illinois. I became friends with some people, but I didn't know anyone from Illinois. It always cracked me up too. I think Tennessee, Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky are very similar people, very similar states, but they all make fun of each other. Mm-hmm. So the people in Illinois would always ask me what I was doing wearing shoes, and I was like, I don't even hunt or do all this stuff that you all do, and you're calling me a redneck because I'm from Kentucky.
Yeah.
So I made some good friends of guys. A couple guys I'm still friends with to this day. I don't see them that often, maybe once a year at our national meeting. But yeah, so I wanted to move back, get closer to home, and get another change. Because again, I was too close to Murray, too close to old habits, and so I came to Louisville. And I was able to. That did help me, which is funny because Louisville being a bigger city, you'd think you'd have more access to things. But it actually, because I didn't know anybody in that world, I started drinking only. Again, which, so that slowed down a little bit some of my problems. Still very unhappy. My mother actually we'll say she was sober. Her last 8 years of life, I don't think she did much of a program. She did a little bit of one, and then I think she just didn't. She was dry. So she became, I kind of forgave her because I did hold resentments for years. And I consider her more of a friend than anything, but we became close her last few years. And so she would come up, spend a lot of time with me here in Louisville. She lived with my grandmother at the time. They lived together. And then, I was still drinking and driving a lot, going out a lot. Wasn't really affecting my work much at all. Then when I was 30, my son was born. And I decided at that point, when he was born, that I was going to set certain rules for myself. I didn't want him to grow up seeing some of the things I'd seen, being exposed to some of that stuff. So I decided to set rules for myself, and I wanted to give him every chance I could for him to be healthy, happy, and well-adjusted. And so I wasn't with his mother, so I would only have him 3 days a week. And so I wouldn't drink those 3 days. I cut out completely everything else. I would just drink, and I wouldn't drink on any time I had my son, and I would stop drinking and driving because that was going to put my job at risk. Not only, that was how my mindset. That's not the only thing wrong with drinking and driving, but that was my mindset, was I could lose my job if I got a DUI. So those were rules I set at the age of 30 when he was born. And again, I will tell you, the consequences haven't been huge to this point, but I was so unhappy. I was so miserable. I never dealt with some of that stuff from my childhood, and I'm throwing a depressant and alcohol on top of it, and so I'm drinking the other 3 or 4 nights I don't have him. I'm drinking as soon as I got off work. And
So
those
making
5
up for it on those nights when you didn't have.
I did. And those 5 or 6 years from college to the time he was born, I drank every night. I didn't even think about it. As soon as I got off work, I drank. If I didn't work, I drank as soon as I woke up. But I still would tell you I did not have a problem because I'd seen an alcoholic in action, and I didn't really have the shakes. There was all these things in my mind I equated with being an alcoholic, and I didn't have those issues.
Yeah. That's another bell ringer, man. Everybody does that. It's like, I'm not as bad as that person.
Exactly.
You can't hold a job. You can't have these things in my life and be an alcoholic. Have some skewed vision of the alcoholic under the overpasses and that kind of stuff, and all these reasons why I'm not that.
I would also get frustrated if anybody called me crazy or an alcoholic. I did not like those terms. Now, I was a heavy drinker. I wasn't an alcoholic, but if I ever started to feel bad about myself, I would watch an episode of Intervention.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I would watch that, and that would prove to me I wasn't an alcoholic. Because obviously there's times I knew what I was doing wasn't normal, and so, but yeah, that you watch an episode or two of Intervention, and you think you're doing just fine.
Yep. Well, I certainly did. I could say, say this before, but nice house, nice wife, 2 kids, 2 cars in a garage, held a job for a long time. You couldn't do all that stuff and be an alcoholic.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't do it.
That's exactly how I thought.
Yeah. And I was wrong.
I think, which we'll get to this, but I think looking back now, I knew all along. I just didn't want to admit it.
Yeah, it's back there,
Yeah, I didn't want to
look in the mirror at yourself, and you're like going, "Dang, dude."
I didn't want to change. I didn't know any different, And I didn't even realize I was unhappy, if that makes sense. I was, but I didn't realize I was as unhappy as I was. So my son, he's a big part of, he's an important part of my story. He was born, and I set those rules. I did okay at first, Then when he was about 2, 3, my mom passed away from a brain aneurysm. But she did die without drinking or drugging in the last few years of her life, and she was a great grandmother to my son, and we got along well, and it was really hard on my grandmother because they lived together, and I hated it for her. She passed away, and for about, let's say, my son was born when I was 2 or 3 years, I really held well to those rules. Really well to those rules. And then I started, after he'd go to bed, I'd have two beers. I'd say,
just a couple.
Yeah, I deserve a couple after he goes to bed. Even though I'm the only person, like if some emergency happens in the middle of the night, I'm the only person there with him. I decided it was okay to start having a couple drinks. And I will tell you, over the next 2 or 3 years, I was able to keep that to 2 to 4 drinks, 2 to 5 on those nights. But it started becoming more like 3 or 4 instead of the 2. So that was the first rule that kind of started to go on those rules I'd set for myself. Another thing I would do is I would schedule my off days to be able to maximize my drinking. Instead of being able to maximize my amount of time I could spend with my son, I would make sure my off days were nights where I could drink all night and drink the next day if I needed to. So I really factored that in. And if his mother wanted to switch a night, I hated it because I've already stayed somewhat sober for 2 nights that I've had him or whatever, and now I got to do another night. when I'm supposed to, and I didn't think this wasn't exactly what I was thinking, but now I know what it was thinking. That's why I'd get so upset if she wanted to switch a night, was because I'd been working hard to keep myself good for 2 nights, and now my next night. But anyway.
Yeah, I can only manage so long, and that's the same thing with those number of beers thing, I mean, we're sitting here trying to manage this thing.
That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
I was trying to do it.
But you wouldn't be able to sustain that. It was just a matter of time before that ramped up.
Like I say, I was that was what, year 3 or 4 about. He was about 3 or 4. And then the next thing that went was, when I'm sitting, even when I was drinking in the madness, when I hadn't drank yet, I knew drinking and driving was reckless. It was stupid. It was everything you can think, dangerous. But you put 1 beer in me. Just 1 beer, and now I'm fine. I'm good. And so that was the next thing, is I started drinking and driving again at night when I'd be out with friends. Instead of leaving the car at that bar which was the plan when the night started, I can drive us to the next place, but then I won't drive out. Then I drive us to the next place, and I drive myself home. So that was the next rule to go. So I've broken 2 of the 3 main rules that I've set for myself when my son was born. And then I guess if we want to lead up to that last year I was drinking or so, I was really breaking those rules consistently. And then I had started seeing a girl. We weren't official or anything. We were just kind of loosely dating. And some things happened that I wasn't, that didn't go my way. She ended up with one of my friends, and I took that personally. And I used that, and then all of a sudden access, as an excuse to dive into some of those extracurriculars again. So now I've broken all 3 rules that I've set for myself when my son was born. And I will tell you, at this point, I'm in full self-misery. I'm miserable internally. I didn't want to kill myself because I thought I didn't want my son to have to live with that.
Yep.
But I wanted to die. And I thought somehow drinking myself to death would be easier for him to deal with. So that I went to bed at night not wanting to wake up. All this stuff I would fantasize about dying while saving somebody, so it was a heroic death.
Yeah.
But I was miserable. I could not. I didn't know any different. I didn't know I wanted to stop drinking. I planned to drink until I died. I just did. I thought I was having a good time. It's what I knew. It's how I knew to
surrender to it. Actually, at some point, we talk about surrender here, when we surrender and stop. When we end up like a really good solid first step, a surrender move. But I remember looking and surrendering to the fact that I'm just going to be a beer drinker the rest of my life.
Yeah, I thought
it's just going to be me. Because I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And I didn't know there was another way out. I really didn't. I didn't know anything about. I'd been court ordered AA when I was a kid, too, but none of that come back to me like as a way to stop. Yeah. And I sure as hell couldn't tell anybody that I had a problem and ask for help. That was totally out of the question.
I agree. I didn't know what to do. I told one of my friends. I asked him. He still drinks, but he drinks. He's not. I don't think he's one of us. I don't diagnose people. He might be one day if he's not careful, but right now he's not. But I asked him if he. I told him I thought I had a problem, and he's like, "Man," he goes, "Once you ring that bell, you can't unring it." And I was like, "You're right. That's all I needed to hear."
So like, once you say you had a problem, then
yeah,
it is kind of because once you walk into AA, man, it fucks up your drinking. Flat and simple, man. It's hard to go back and drink again after you've been in here and heard enough stories.
Yeah. And that was about January. Okay. And I told you I got sober in March. When I told him that, I was like, I think I got a problem. He's like, once you ring that bell, you can't unring it. I'm like, you're right. Maybe I'm overreacting. It was just a wild weekend. Maybe I'm fine. It got a little out of control, but, the driving, the extracurriculars, started picking up more consistently. And then, the last weekend, I was going to go to Nashville, and I sometimes wonder, I'm glad I didn't, but I sometimes wonder how things would have been if I'd gone to Nashville. But I changed my mind at the last minute, decided to stay in town to watch my son. He was competing in, he did Cub Scouts, and it was the Pinewood Derby.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in, I can't remember if it was regionals. He was doing one districts, and he was competing, and I decided to stay to watch him. And then that Saturday night, some friends picked me up to go out. We went out, and we ended up at my favorite bar about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I got a hold of some stuff to really finish the night off strong. And then the next day was a Sunday. I woke up, got a little bit of sleep, not much. Woke up, started drinking again. And at some point, I walked out to get the mail or something, and noticed that the front right tire of my Escape was exploded, shredded. Well, if you remember, I said I got picked up to go out that night. And I'm like, what the? And so I texted my favorite bartender, and I texted another guy, and I was like, did I drive last night? And both of them were like, I don't know. And I was like, man, so this is Sunday afternoon. I've got a shredded tire. I've got to work the next day. I'm already been drinking for a few hours. Well, I'll keep drinking tonight, and I'll deal with it in the morning. I thought I could just put on the spare, go to work, and deal with it in the morning. So I keep drinking all night long till about 1 in the morning, and I get up at, probably then I was getting up about 6 to try to be at work at 6:40. But I set my alarm. I get up at 5 in the morning, been asleep like 4 hours, and I look at that Escape, and I mean, there's so much damage done to it to the tire. Luckily, it was just literally the tire and the rim. That there was no putting a spare on it and going to work, and I was just, I don't know how to explain it. I was just so emotionally done. I was scared, and so Uber wasn't really, I wonder if Uber had been a thing. Uber was probably a thing, it just wasn't as prevalent. And so which I'm kind of mad that came along after I stopped drinking.
Yeah.
You know how much money I could have saved, and maybe I wouldn't have drank and drove as much.
I got a friend who had like a personal Uber driver for a while. He wouldn't drive anywhere, and he thought that was being responsible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, kind of pat himself on the back, that he could, hey man, I'm not driving.
Yeah.
I'm shit-faced when I show up at work at 7 in the morning, but it's because I'm taking an Uber to work in the morning because I'm drunk.
So I just don't know what to do, man. And so I called one of my buddies who works for my company. It's 5:30 in the morning, and he answered, and he doesn't have to work till more like 8. And he answered the phone, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I told him what happened. I was like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, I'll be right over. He goes, call your assistant and tell him he needs to work open, and you're not going to be in work that day. And so he gets over, and I start explaining to him what I've been doing and how long all these things. And at some point I told him, and I think I scared the hell out of him. I told him I wanted to die. It's like, I'm miserable. I want to die. And so that freaked him out. And he had called another one of our friends to come over. I'm really close to both these guys, so I was like, yeah, that's fine. Bring them over. Well, unbeknownst to me, this is kind of a funny backstory, is about 10 years before this, there was a guy that worked for our company. And I met him. I hadn't even met him, I don't think. I talked to him on the phone once. A 2-minute conversation where he called me, asked me a question. I didn't know the answer to the question, and he hung up on me. And I disliked that guy for 10 years over that 2-minute conversation, because that's his personality. He was extremely short, right? That's just how he was. And what's funny is, about a year before all this happened, that guy left our company. about a year before all this went down, he was really close to my boss, and he came in my store to get some stir sticks or something from me needed for some kind of charity thing. And I was like, that doesn't seem like the same guy. He seems happier. He doesn't seem as much of an asshole. Something seems different about that guy.
Huh.
Well, fast forward to this day. This morning, both these guys are in my living room, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And my buddy Tim's like, do you care if I reach out to John? He used to drink a lot, and he doesn't drink anymore. I'm like, I don't care. That's fine. So he calls up John, and John, unbeknownst to me, is in a 12-step program, and he shows up with his sponsor, and they start talking to me. And for whatever reason, the first time, I was fairly honest. I don't know how you were whenever I'd go to the doctors throughout the years. If they asked how much I drink, I'd so downplay it, because what they considered a heavy drinker was, what I did on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Once a week, and they're saying, do you do this more than once, whatever? And you're like, what? But anyway, so they came over, and they're talking to me, and at one point I remember I was like, I don't know why I do what I do, but once I can't once I put even one drink of alcohol in me, I can't control where things are going to go. And they go, we understand, we know why you do what you do. And so they asked me to go get evaluated at the Brook. And they asked me to go to a meeting with them the next day, and so I did. I went to get evaluated at the Brook, and for the first time in years, I'd even seen a therapist. I'd started seeing a therapist right before this, probably for about a month, to try to work through some things, and the only thing I wasn't honest with her about was drinking, because I knew what she was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, so I go, and in my intake, I was completely honest for probably the first time in my life. And I was just beaten. I didn't know what to do. And, I told my boss, and I told my grandmother. And that might have helped me early on stay accountable. Because I basically, I told the mother of my son what I was going to do. She was very supportive. She decided to work with me on allowing me to go to meetings, and I did outpatient through the Brook, and I started doing meetings. And
so you didn't go to a detox?
I did not. I did not. They let me do outpatient, and
was that you? Did they want you to come in? Really?
No, I went in that day. They evaluated me. They said start. I don't know if I started Wednesday, because that was Monday. And that's why my sponsor says I don't get to count that Monday, even though I hadn't drank. Basically, I stopped drinking late Sunday night, probably Monday around 1 in the morning.
Yeah, carried you over to.
Yeah, he gave me Tuesday as my sobriety date.
Yeah. Them's the rules in AA.
Those are the rules. And I remember
my nicotine quitting world, the day you stop is your day.
It is.
Yeah, but none of the calculators, like the apps and stuff, none of them operate that way. So you got to lie a day in order to have your numbers right.
That's one vice I never picked up was smoking, because I think it was my mom smoked so much that it just, I don't know what, I swear she was like a 2-pack a day smoker until the end, and it just never, but I would have been, if I had ever picked it up, who knows how much I would have smoked. But
so you did outpatient, did you do like the normal 20-day IOP kind of thing that most of us do?
It feels like it was 2 months.
Really?
I don't know how long it was. The outpatient, it was 3 days a week. It was at night. 6 to 9 at night. And then I was doing meetings. And I will tell you funny, when they were, I call it a 12-step. It probably wasn't a traditional 12-step when John and Clyde came over. But I was down for the rehab option. I was down for the, I knew I had a problem. But they said, there's these meetings. And that's the one thing I was like, ooh. How often you go to these meetings? And they're like, well, early on you need to go almost every day, and we go a lot. And I go, man, I'm a busy guy. I got a job and a son I have 3 days a week. I don't know about these meetings now all the time. So that was the only hesitation I had. But my I think you might have forgotten that I mentioned this, but my first meeting was that Tuesday night emotional sobriety.
Yeah, I think I recall it. Yeah.
6 p.m. I missed that meeting. There was some great people in there, and it was a smaller meeting, which I needed. I'm not extremely comfortable talking in front of big groups still. I need to work on that. But you guys made me feel really welcome, and I made it part of my regular rotation. I did the outpatient. I stopped seeing my therapist until I was done because she is not a addiction specialist by any means, and so she's like, let's wait till you get done and then we'll start again and try to do all this. And so, early on, I didn't know how it was going to go. I knew I'd committed to this, to my family, my work, and some people, but there's rough times. I'm used to what I'm used to. But I'd do 2 meetings a week probably, and the outpatient, and then when I got done with that, I maybe upped it a little bit. That guy that I didn't like, who was the one who showed up, I don't know if you got that part of the story, sorry. The guy that was John, who I didn't like years ago. He was now my...
Yep.
He had gotten sober, and he's my sponsor, still my sponsor to this day.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny because he tells that sometimes about what that story, he likes telling it too, that I thought he was an asshole, and he'll admit he was. But he's a good guy, and I don't know, that first year was tough, but I think a lot of it I stayed in the middle and tried to talk to guys like you as much as I could. Probably not enough.
Apparently it was.
Yeah. I've still got this. I'm still with that same company that I've been 16 years now. 16 years in June. I've been with the company. They worked with me. I didn't have to miss any work because I did the outpatient. But I did make them aware. It's funny looking back. I would have told you that I never rarely got hungover, unless I drank shots or got into. I was big into Jaeger there for a while, and I would tell you, unless I hit it too hard, I wasn't ever hungover, and I was good at my job and all these things. Well, you're 6 months of not drinking, and you realize I was hungover every day. It was just how badly was I hungover.
Right.
And then I became so much better at my job because again, I didn't drink on those nights. I didn't have my son for a long time, but I was so what's the word? I've used miserable a lot, but it was like grouchy. I don't know what I want to say, but you understand.
Typical restless, irritable, and discontent stuff.
That's
man.
I was very irritable. That's what I was searching.
Because when I'm not drinking, I am irritable as shit. And I mean, you can't. Every little thing is a pain, and
So I was just trying to get to the next day I could drink on those days I wasn't drinking. So it's funny how once you reflect on some things, you can realize that.
So much stuff gets a lot clearer in that rearview mirror. When I look back at the time, I didn't have a clue, but now I go after doing inventory and getting some clarity with a sponsor and support group and people like that, I can see some of that stuff back there. I can relate totally with you. The reason I mostly didn't have a hangover is because I was drunk all the time. And that really was the fact of the matter is by morning, I'm still buzzing, and what I would do is I didn't have nothing keeping me from drinking 3 nights a week or anything. So the only thing I could do is try to get over that in the morning and feel a little better. Even though it was, it wasn't a hangover per se, and I'd argue with you if you told me it was. But, by lunchtime, I'm looking to going at the clock. I'm seeing it's going to be 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in a little while, and I'll be back across the street to get some more, and I'll get going again. So it never really ever left my system. A hangover technically is a withdrawal.
Is it?
Right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about alcohol is that as long as our blood alcohol is raised, our blood alcohol limit or content is raising, we feel good. We feel good. That's why we keep on drinking. The minute we kick over the edge and we stop drinking for whatever reason, and our blood alcohol content starts dropping, that's when things go to shit for us. Mm-hmm. That's when we feel like crap. and that's when it starts popping down, and that is part of that withdrawal kind of syndrome. And when actually, I'd argue with you that I don't get hangovers.
I said it for years. I remember in college I used to joke that my alcohol level had too much blood in it. That was one of my jokes. I had a few. I thought I was clever.
Yeah. We did think we were cute.
Yeah, I definitely thought I was. But I feel very lucky because I remember, and I told my therapist at one point, it sounds like things just transitioned into some smooth road for me. But I told my therapist, I think I was about 6-8 months in. And I told her at one point, I was like, I just need you to keep this train on the tracks as long as possible because it's coming back off again. And I'm just trying to keep, because I really didn't think things were going to work out. I was finally starting to resolve some of those things. You call it trauma. She used word trauma from early on.
It's just the best word I can come up with. That kind of that wraps it up.
Yeah.
Sometimes people want to attach like violence to trauma or something like that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just stuff that affects us in such a traumatic way. It's very impactful.
Yeah, that sticks with us. And but somehow, there were a couple things. I went to one place out in LaGrange that gave out. Every month they would give out a chip.
My home group does.
And it really helped to have that goal. And then I you said something at the beginning that always sticks with me is my counselor in IOP said that he thinks people could, anybody could benefit from this program, whether they deal with alcohol and drug addiction or even if they have what they think is no problems in the world. It's just a good program designed for living. Well, he said that, which I liked, but there were he was on me about a couple different things that he didn't like how I was handling, and so he told me I wasn't going to stay sober if I didn't address those two things. And so I used him as motivation to stay sober because I wasn't going to allow him to be right for that first year. So those were a few things that probably helped me because, first year's tough.
Yeah. I remember when you were around, and I could see that you wanted it. There was something you didn't want to drink anymore. That's really what you were not wanting the misery, right? Yeah. And you knew that. But you really wasn't convinced that you weren't going to drink again, right?
Oh, no, not.
And that you'd had to give it up. And you did have a wall up, and you would joke about it, and you'd make light of it at some level in your shares and stuff about,
Well, I struggle to talk in front of people. That's one of my issues is I have some social anxiety.
Yeah, and would use maybe the comedic effect to kind of get over that. But, I could always tell that you was trying to keep things at arm's length, and me, I'm sitting there with an ankle bracelet on, trying to keep from going to prison for 6 to 20 years to what the judge told me was going to happen. And so my mind that whole time is going, if you drink, Dan, that is what, it'll be cha-ching, bing, bang, clang, the door shut, and you're in jail. Now, actually, I found out later on that I had a couple mulligans and that. Oh, yeah. I don't know if I ever told that story in my podcast or not. I don't think I did, but they didn't, I didn't get the rule book until I was 90 days in. And I always thought that was kind of funny because that was one of my things. I was like, I always felt like I was like just playing this thing in the middle, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know. I knew I wasn't going to break a rule on purpose. What I was scared of doing is breaking a rule by accident that I wasn't aware of, and that's what would keep on happening. Yeah. Is I would find out the rules by either breaking them or like not taking advantage of things I could take advantage of. Like one time they said, "Well, how come you're only going to your mom's house for an hour on Sunday?" I said, that's all they told me I could do. And they were, no, you've been in here for 90 days. You can go over for a couple hours now. Okay. Which is like whoop-de-doo, right? Yeah. But still, they were asking that, and I was like, and I laughed that day, and I looked at her, and this was a girl you had to go down there and talk to, check in, and this is a gal that I'd never had to check in before with. You had normal people. If they were on vacation or whatever, or was out sick, you might end up having to go check in with somebody that wasn't your normal corrections officer person you were talking to. And she goes, they didn't give you the handbook? And I laughed, and I was like, I thought she was joking. I was like, no, they didn't give me the handbook. And she goes, she opens this drawer behind the desk, real slow too. And she's looking at me right in the eyes when she's doing it like I'm doing you now.
Yeah.
And she pulls it out and she reaches in and she picks it up and she shows it to me. She holds it up and it says HIP participant guidelines on it, or handbook or something. And I said, and I go, no, they never give me one of those. And she like real carefully like look at me and she puts it back in the drawer and she shuts the drawer. She goes, okay, we'll talk to somebody about that. She moves on. I'm like, and then my mind is telling me, she's going, what has this dude done that they're not giving him the handbook?
Oh, that's how you took it.
But by this point, where I was going with that is that by that point, I finally got a handbook. And I read in there that I had some mulligans under my belt. I could have like failed a couple blood alcohol tests, and I wouldn't have gotten in trouble. But I thought that I would go straight to jail if I screwed it up. So that actually was another one of them higher power doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. Well,
I'll tell you from early
I thought the jail cells was going to close on me the minute I drank. So I had a lot of. To circle all the way back, is I had all these consequences leaning on me, or perceived consequences leaning on me, and I run into people what I perceived like with you that really didn't have that kind of ass on fire, one false move and you're screwed kind of deal, and I could feel like those that keeping it like I'm not sure I want to buy into your shit. I'm not like the rest of you guys. I'm not as bad as you are.
I would tell you from the beginning, I thought you had it together. You seemed like you were motivated from the different people I would see in the rooms.
I was motivated. I was motivated to stay sober, man. I wanted to stay out of prison.
I always enjoyed your shares. But I wouldn't say, I thought I was one of you all. I knew I was one of you all. I just didn't know. I don't know what. Well, first of all, I'm a little bit shy in those settings, and then there were other reasons I was. I don't like bringing this up because people get weirded out about it, but I struggle with the religious aspects.
Yeah, man.
And so that was.
It's a big block for all of us.
That was probably why you were seeing more trepidation. It wasn't about that
Well, that's a travesty at some level, because now we know it's not that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that this is not a religious program, that you guys subscribe to these other things, but we come in the door thinking that, or at least I thought it, because I was seeing God, and I knew what that was. Y'all been telling me about that from church when I was a little kid and all this. I knew what that was.
Yeah.
And I don't subscribe to that. I don't do that.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, didn't it take you a while to get to where you were working the steps? Didn't you have some?
Yes. So my sponsor,
because that's another surrender thing, when you're not like, I was like, give me steps, I will eat them.
Really?
I want them for lunch, because I just didn't want to go to prison, man. I had 2 cars in the house and all this stuff going on for me in life, man. And my next stop on the end of the street was prison.
Well,
and people were saying, work these steps, you don't go to jail. And I was okay, I will take them.
In IOP, they want you to get at least to, I forget now, but like 3 or 4 step maybe, because of the percentages, it's a numbers game of how many people stay sober. And so I did them in that, I got to a certain point in that atmosphere, but then my sponsor was like, let's start over, and him and I struggled we're on different schedules, and so we struggled to consistently meet. So we started and maybe got through the first 2 or 3, and then just couldn't consistently meet. So he's like, look, you got to get through these. You've gotten this far, but you got to do something about this. So I started a step study about, if you ask me when I completed steps, it will be around 16 months in. So, and it was an 18-week step study. So 18 weeks before that I started. I don't know why I'm getting all tongue-tied on this, but that's how I did the steps.
Your first trip through steps was the step study.
Step study. And I liked it because I had to hold accountable. We're meeting each week. There's things to get done. Now, interesting enough, I've also done, since then, I've done the back to basics once when when Robbie was still, before he moved to Florida, him and his wife did those consistently. Somebody else, I believe, has taken up that mantra now. But anyway, I did that. Well, then these last few months, I've been especially irritable. Some people in the rooms have been irritating me consistently. And it's all me. I mean, I'm the one who has issues. But anyway, so I decided I need to do the steps again. So I'm doing them again right now with a guy who is very like-minded with some things on me. And we finished. We're about week 5 or so of doing them, second or third. So I'm redoing them right now.
Well, good, man. Yeah, because it is a thing in my lineage is that you do them on a regular basis. You know, and I'm in the steps right now.
Are you? Yeah.
And that's a little threesome we got going on. Me and 2 other guys. Actually, they asked me to take them through the steps, and I said, and we kind of all agreed. How about we just go through together, the 3 of us, and we've all got a little time.
Yeah. Well, this guy's doing them kind of. He'll have me do it, and then we'll basically read through it and do it together. So it's not my sponsor. I'm doing it with someone else, but I just felt, I was like, man, I haven't felt right for a little bit, and I was like, I need to go through these again. I don't remember when I did that back to basics. That was at least 2 years ago, and I was like, it's been too long. I need to do it. You know, and I try to go to 3 to 5 meetings a week. I can tell you there's been times I've been closer to 2 a week, and I can tell a big difference when I'm down there. But I also think I need to get a little variety going. You know, you see some of the same people, hear some of the same things. You just need a little variety, I think. But things are going well. I've been much more successful at my job. You know, I told you I thought I was good at my job. I was fairly successful, but I'd only won 1 award while I was drinking. I've won 3 in the 4 years I've been sober.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do your work when you're not irritable. You know, my son is awesome. He's about to start 7th grade. I still have him about 3 to 4 days a week. I get along with his mother, her fiance, really well. You know, things are going real well in my life. Yeah,
that's what one of the things, you know, as I talk about this and we talk, I really am interested in watching and hearing about how people's upbringing, because there's something to that, no doubt. And I heard it from you, you know, and the stories vary greatly. But there's always some stuff that's going on in our childhood and stuff, and I believe that we're alcoholics born that way. I really do.
I do.
I hear a little bit of this stuff, and you can read into some literature and stuff that would have you maybe believe that you can drink yourself into alcoholism or whatever, and maybe you can. Majority of people I talk to, if I go back and listen to them, I hear that they've had that issue inside from childhood, and circumstances exasperated that and caused them to have, you know, these, like I said, these trauma events and these things that we don't know how to deal with, and we don't have tools or parents around to be able to talk to us about, you know, that you can go to. You know, I see that in some places once in a while where I see some kid that has this parent that they can go to and talk to stuff, or their parent is insightful enough to like open up these conversations and do that. And I have a great mom and dad, and they would offer that kind of stuff to me, but I could not. Stuff happened to me I couldn't possibly tell them about. I just couldn't, man. I mean, I had these sexual relations with a little kid when I was like in the 4 or 5 years old kind of range. Yeah. And I don't even think that made it onto my podcast. Okay. I don't think it did. And it really, I carry that even today at some level, more so than I would like to admit, of some confusion and some stuff about not knowing what to do with that. And I know rationalizing it today, looking at it and going, and not rationalize it in a negative manner, but in a true manner, I can look at that and know there was just a couple kids experimenting, and it was completely natural, and there was nothing wrong with it, and I didn't have to. But what it made me feel was dirty. Yeah. And I started getting some signals from someplace else that told me that was wrong, you know, and I held on to that, you know, and I questioned my sexuality as I grew up. And any, like if you would like to try to put something on me that direction, well, I would really lash back about, you know, if you'd even hint around at me being gay or anything like that. And I also had to like act out the other way to prove that I was a male and that I was not. And, you know, and today I don't have any of those feelings in my heart anymore. You know, I think they're born that way, and you just are who you are, and I'm okay with who you are. Yeah. But I didn't know how to deal with that. And I sure as hell couldn't tell my parents about it. So I like these stories of this, and then also, we hear about how it happened, about how we, all that. And I know the big book talks about it, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Makes it pretty simple. What it was like is all that stuff when we were kids and all this. A lot of people want to look at that. Like a lot of people's stories will start when they first started drinking or something. And there's so much before that.
My childhood affected me, a lot. My grandmother would let me talk to her, but
And she was probably wise enough, because of that age thing, where she was, my parent, she's just got a lot more years on her, so she's got some wisdom and able to look at you and open that, but you probably weren't able to
I didn't want to talk. I just didn't want to talk about it. And
okay, Grandma. No, that's all right.
Yeah, day's been great.
I'm good.
I don't mind kids were making fun of me all day. I'm great. I'm good.
I'm okay. No big deal.
And I didn't let that know, but I agree. I hate to personally put what happened in my issues and how I dealt with life as an adult on my childhood, because I think a lot of people had much harder childhoods than me.
Absolutely.
But I do think, and that's why...
And it's not a blame thing either, though, but it's also, there's a cause and condition thing, just like the book says. When we're going back and look at this, we're fact-finding, fact-facing, looking for causes and conditions to what brought us to where we're at today. And that's the facts. Your story is your facts, and that's
And I think reflecting is important, and that's I've tried to do that through the program and through therapy. I've tried to do it dually, a couple different ways, and that's why again my motivation. You hear a lot of people say you have to do it for yourself, and I agree. You do. You do have to do it for yourself. But my son's been a big motivation to me because I want him to have every ability to be raised in a stable environment, and we'll go from there. If
well, that's where I was actually circling back around about how we do this, how I like to play it out, because and you talked about a little bit of it, but you glossed over a little of it, of like I said, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And like what it's like today is like if you've heard me talk, I've talked about this miracle list I have of this stuff that's happened to me, and the things like the miracle of the fact that the father you can be today because of recovery.
And I try,
because you couldn't possibly be that, could you? Well, we're always a work in process. But I mean, if you would sit there and you look at the guy who, how old is your son now?
He's 12.
Yeah, so let's go 15 years ago. What you were doing and the way you were behaving, and if you were that guy today trying to raise this son, you're a completely different. You're a completely different guy. I mean, it's night and day. We kind of downplay that about what we were like, and try to like put that forward. Says I carry a lot of that. I didn't get sober until my kids were in like 8-10 years old type of range, so I know a lot of the damage I did to them actively drinking, because like you were saying, I didn't stay sober when they were with me, and when their mom was off working and doing stuff and we were together, and even after we were divorced and stuff and I couldn't stay sober, they were with me, and I saw the eyes of my kids look down to see if that beer was in my hand, and the look that they would look up at me when they knew that I was drinking, and not knowing what dad they were going to get when I got home. So like I really wanted, there is a different thing, dude. I mean, the miracle of being a sober father is a miracle. These trips that you won, I've seen you on these things at work. That's another thing. There's no way you're winning these awards and getting these. That usually what the award is, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
you get to go someplace really cool.
The biggest, the highest honor is you get to go on the places, and those are different trips to take sober, but they're fun. You know, other people are.
And those are miracles, man. You don't get that in your life, or I wouldn't. I'm going to venture to say that you wouldn't have those things happen in your life if you were still.
I don't think so.
The guy you were either sober, or if you were still drinking, or just not drinking without a program, right? That's just as miserable as being drunk, right?
Yeah, so, I think it would be.
So that's why I want to say that the fact that we've worked these steps and you've done this work ends up putting you in a position where you get to be able to have these things happen. The universe, it's all out there for us. We just have to put ourselves in a position to be able to receive it.
We do, and I don't know how you feel, but I feel like I'm as comfortable in my skin as I've been in my entire life.
Oh, me too. I know I am.
Yeah.
I am me today.
Yeah. And I think I told you earlier that I felt like I was a better person at like 16, 17 than I was most of my adulthood. I feel like I'm starting to get back to that. Not totally back there, I still have plenty of flaws and and things, but I'm much better, and I'm happier. Like anybody else, we have good days and bad. But
Yep, and you're taking measures to when it comes up. That's the other thing. I just talk a lot about course correction, when you felt yourself being restless, irritable, discontent again, and having some things go on, man, and now you're taking another trip through the steps with a new teacher, right? And so then you're going to pick up new tools, because you're only going to be able to get so much from your other teacher. I don't care how good they are, and that's not a knock, because I think that's the way this program is supposed to work. I think it means we're supposed to get with this guy and go through the steps with this person and work through with this person, and then when we get what we can get here, and not get by but we learn. This teacher teaches us certain things, ways, and then we get another set of teachings from another person,
different perspectives.
And I love that thought of going through, and that's the other thing that happens to me. I'm fortunate in the fact that I get to sponsor a lot of guys. I get asked to sponsor a lot of guys, and every time I go through the steps with somebody, it's like going through the steps myself too, because I sit there and I listen to a guy tell me about things, and I watch what he writes and the things he does, and I'm going, yeah. That's the mirror's turned around on me, and I get to see that stuff, doing fist steps with people and saying, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, it's amazing how we have similar. It's like we say we're similar, but we're also very unique.
Yep.
In the way we got to where we got, but I think a lot of similarities of how we felt and about life and ourselves and different things.
So, I feel like you've a lot of times what happens, and that's what I like about this longer format. Have you gotten an opportunity to speak behind the podium?
I've shared my story, I think 3 times.
Yeah. So, it feels a little rushed, right? Because you're in between that 10 minutes after the hour to the 10 minutes before the hour. And
it does. And I told you this is a little more comfortable environment for me. For whatever reason, I've come a long way, but I struggle speaking in front of people. Especially larger groups.
Yeah, this makes it pretty easy. I really like doing this because I get to look you in the eyes. I get you to myself. There's a selfishness that I get to hear your story all by myself before the rest of the podcast listeners even get it. Yeah. I get to sit here and do that, and there's a connection that happens between me and every person sitting here. Now we've known each other for a few years, and the same thing with some other people who have said across here. Yeah. My first guests were my sponsees, and I knew them pretty well, but I knew them better after sitting here and doing this exchange of stories behind these microphones, because after a little bit the microphones disappear, and then we're just talking. We're just talking. We're kind of talking like we'd be talking at a bar or something. It's got that kind of where we're just sitting someplace sharing one another's journeys with each other.
It's a good thing you do here.
Yeah. Oh, now that hasn't happened for a while. That's interesting.
I think that's Dan's way of telling me we need to wrap up, folks.
That's my air compressor comes on quite often, and I thought I had it turned off. I hadn't actually been in the shop that often. What I do like to offer a guy, because you did a great job today, and I loved hearing your story. One thing I was just wondering, one thing I do is ask if you got any concluding thoughts, if there's anything you want to share, if there's anything you want to say about your journey, or talk to a new guy, or anything of that nature that you might want to do to close this and feel complete in your time here.
Well, I'd just say, early on, there's a lot of, is this going to work? Is it a better way of living? Can I do it? And I think, we'll both attest that it's so nice. There's certain things, for example, I'll just give you a quick example, is I love sports. And when I was drinking, I would not go to sports games because I didn't like to fight the crowds. I didn't like to, whatever reason, I didn't like to go to sporting events when I was drinking. And now in sobriety, I go to sporting events all the time.
There's another miracle.
And so you can have fun, and life is just a lot better when you can, get a fresh perspective on it.
Yep. I mean, with this, that we don't have to live like that anymore, man. The world, it really is. It's a little cliche, but the world is our oyster today. That's the way I feel about it. The world is my oyster. I get to do what I want to do today, man. I get to walk and go places, and like you said, like that, I go to music festivals where I used to not. I couldn't imagine not going. I couldn't imagine going to concerts sober. And today I love to do it. I have a blast going and watching and
There's things I never thought I'd do. I run. I don't run a lot, but I do run occasionally now, and that's something I would have never, and there's just different things. You do different things. You do some of the same things, too. You just do them sober.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of things that I did that fell off the wayside, too, that didn't follow me into, or haven't followed me into sobriety yet. I used to play some golf. That's something that fell off. There's some other things. I still haven't really completely learned to fish. I used to love to fish, and I haven't completely learned to fish sober. It's just something that has not taken a priority. I love to hunt, and I still go out in the woods, and I do that part of it, and I do that sober today. But there's some things that follow me in, and then, of course, I've picked up a lot of new things that I never thought I would be doing. Sober or drunk.
Funny how that'll work.
Yeah, you caught me on a yoga mat, I'd have shot you.
I still can't do that. I can't stay focused long enough.
Yet.
Yet.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on. Our friend, I say it over and over, and I know people probably may think it's disingenuous, but it's not. I have a host of friends around me that just blow me away, and a lot of them mean a lot to me. And these kind of the guys that, like, when you were early on together. I feel like it's like a battle buddy thing. It's like combat buddies in a sense. When you're kind of in that early recovery together, and there's a bond that happens. It does for me anyway. That I think of like I will see you for the rest of my life when I see you, and I will think about that and the thing that we went through together and what we've done and how we've come out through the other side. It's just an honor to have these friends.
Mentioning that emotional sobriety meeting because it was just so influential that first year.
Yeah, it was me too, man. And now thinking the name of it and all that, and no, I'm not going to quit beating the drum on that kind of stuff. That's what I say. 2 for Tuesdays. I was doing that and turning around and going to Spiritual Underground right after that, and it was my juice day. It still is. Tuesdays are still my anchor, even though that. And you know what I do now? And one of the things that happened is that I started using that time before the Tuesday night meeting. And one of the things that pulled me away from the Spiritual Underground or from the emotional sobriety meeting was I started sponsoring guys, and I was using that time before the meeting to meet with people, and so I was still getting a big dose of heavy duty recovery in my life. I just wasn't getting it through that meeting. I mean, it's just sacrifices you had to make sometimes. We
do that.
One of the things is today. Another thing I say is that I have so many good things, choices of things to do in my life. I can't possibly do them all. I got to pick what I'm gonna do.
We do.
Like tonight. I got so many cool things to do tonight. I got things that I can do tomorrow night. That I had to actually pick, and I can't say yes to everything.
No, we can't. I want to thank you for having me on. I think I needed to do this. So.
Yeah, it's fun. I like it, man. I'm juiced up afterwards. It takes a little bit of emotional toll for me. I don't really understand exactly what that's about, but I always have I have to schedule a little downtime right afterwards. Okay. Like there's an emotional outpouring of connecting with somebody.
Yeah.
That like Dave was here, and he said he was talking about some science behind that, about how when you give of yourself like this.
Yeah.
Because I'm intent in listening to you, and I'm really trying to engage and listen.
Well, I always feel like I'm boring people, but hopefully I kept you entertained.
Yeah, no, you did. I am. Every one of these stories, man, I'm just engaged. I'm enthusiastic of hearing them, and I love to hear stories of 12-step recovery specifically. And I've been branching out a little bit, having some other people talk about recovery stuff too. I've got a girl. One of the more recent ones was a gal come on from Dallas, Texas, and talked about divorce recovery. Okay. Recovering from divorce, because that's a traumatic event in your life, yeah. And then one of the hardest things I've ever went through was go through that. We had a guy could come on and talk about cessation from nicotine and getting recovering from addiction to that drug. Yeah. And it was, again, I have that in my story, and it was I didn't give it the credit that I should have given it from the beginning. I said, I'd quit harder things, and nicotine wouldn't be a big deal, and quitting nicotine kicked my ass.
I know it. I know a lot of people that struggle with that. I'm hoping that this will also maybe make me a little more comfortable next time I tell my story.
Yeah, that's the other thing. A few people's been able to do this, and this is their very first time speaking, so they get to do this behind this microphone and get that together, and it'll be out there, so you can go listen to it again.
I don't know if I want to hear my
before
voice.
Everybody gets kind of funny about that. So, man, thank you. spiritualunderground.org. You can come out and see a picture of the guests on the show, and there's a contact me page. Anything like recovery based that you think I might be able to help you with, and I encourage feedback for the podcast too. It's really doing well and keeps on gaining listeners and growing. So thank you all for listening. And that it's just I will do that in my closing. DTMWW.net. That's my little woodworking business and handyman stuff. If you're local, I can send you woodwork abroad or whatever. But the handyman end of it has got to be. I only can drive so far to do that. So you need anything done, let me know. Music around this podcast is produced is written by Darren Frank. And, some of it's produced by Jesse Simpson, too. So that's got a couple of guys, brothers of mine that are putting the music together for the podcast. And 12-Step Spiritual Recovery by James Christopher Cone, available at Amazon. So here's what I was stalling on just a minute ago. Thank you for allowing me to participate in my recovery in this manner, because this is another big, huge stone cornerstone that helps keep me sober today. Peace out.
I'm so tired of being in control, always telling me which way to go. Don't move so fast, but that's way too slow. This life is starting to take its toll. I just need to get away. Wanna find some place I can escape. Gonna drive all night till I find a new day waiting for me. So I got my headlights on in the middle of the night. There's darkness all around, but I still can see the light. And I ain't slowing down, cause it sure feels right. And I'm looking to that light up ahead. Yeah, 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 up ahead. Yeah, 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 yeah. Pressure's coming at me from all sides. Feel stuck in the middle as worlds collide. I do my best to take it all in stride, but it's just so much I wanna run and hide. I just need to get away. Wanna find some place I can escape. Gonna drive all night till I find a new day waiting for me. So I got my headlights on in the middle of the night. There's darkness all around, but I still can see the light. And I ain't slowing down, cause it sure feels right. And I'm looking to that light up ahead.